Hello, good evening and welcome to BizFirst Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the economy. I'm Nadim Majid. This week saw President Maithripala Sirisena sacking the Justice Minister Wijayadasa Rajapaksa at the request of the United National Party over allegedly breaching the collective responsibility of Cabinet and criticising the Hambantota port deal with China Merchant Port Holdings. He was also accused of stalling corruption investigations into key members of the former regime. Meanwhile, against this backdrop, former Central Bank Governor Ajit Nivad Cabral appeared before the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into bond issuances. That's a recap of the major events which transpired in the political arena this week. Let's take a look at the top news stories from the business and finance sector.
State Minister of Finance Eran Wickramaratne told reporters Thursday that no changes will take place in taxes on stock market trading under the new income tax law. The new Inland Revenue Bill had proposed a 28% tax on profits of capital gains in stock trading. Minister Wickramaratne also assured the media that concerns raised by exporters have been addressed.
There is no change to how the taxes are going to be levied on stock market transactions. It's going to be the same manner in which it is done today. The only tax on stock market transactions as of today is the stock transaction levy, the STL. That STL will remain. Share transaction levy will remain. But there is no change in the way it is going to be computed. Exports earnings are 14% tax, right? Unlike the regular tax, you are a favored area. Anything exports, or you are an individual and you have interest income, or you subsequently invest it, then that follows the usual process. It's for exports, and deemed exports are also included in it, in the concessionally tax regime, because we want to encourage exports. Export companies, then they put a small percentage into the local market,
especially BU.
Right. So we had to make a decision, right? We had to make a decision. Either we had to go through a cumbersome process of establishing that this is 80% and that 20%, and then we have two tax regimes. So we have decided that if that company is primarily in exports, then we will give them the concessionally tax rate. But primarily in exports is defined as 80%.
The Asian Development Bank unveiled a 5-year new financing plan that will provide up to $5 billion to Sri Lanka. The plan is aimed at helping the island nation reach an upper middle income status.
The CPS has been developed to support Sri Lanka's transitions to an upper middle income country status. Our assistance is closely aligned with the development strategy of the government of Sri Lanka.
According to the ADB, its 2018 to 2022 country partnership strategy seeks to diversify economic activities, boost productivity and improve inclusivity. The financing is set to be allocated for transport, energy, urban infrastructure such as water, roads and sewage. The funds will also go to finance an economic corridor from Colombo to Trincomalee and boost human capital.
Our CPS for 2018-2022 will focus on two strategic objectives, which is first to strengthen the drivers of growth by promoting diversifications of economic activities and productivity enhancement. And the second one is to improve the quality of growth by promoting inclusiveness.
Stay tuned to BizFirst Review 360. On the other side of this break, a chat on the upcoming budget. Welcome back to the program. For 2018, will the government be able to finally present a budget that they will be able to live up to? Some key insights from Verite research found that over the years, Sri Lankan budgets by successive governments have had a track record of over-promising and under-delivering. Will that be the case in 2018 as well? I sat down with the Executive Director at Verite Research, Dr. Nishan Demel, to find out more. Nishan, thank you very much for joining us on BizFirst Review 360. Why should we be concerned with Budget 2018?
Glad to be here, Nadim. Well, I think you're referring to some analysis that we've done recently. And in fact, it builds on analysis that we've been doing over the years. What we have seen is consistently over a large number of sectors, when it comes to the budget, everybody focuses on what the budget proposes. And there are very generous proposals on things that people care about, things like agriculture, things like education, healthcare. But when it comes to delivery and what is actually done in terms of allocating the proposed resources, 1 year later you find that it hasn't kept the promise that was made in the budget. So that's a serious issue, which is why I think we are coming into this discussion now before the budget, because as soon as the budget proposals are in, it seems that people lose sight of everything else except what the proposals are, and that becomes the story. But really what people care about is what the government does, not what it says it will do. And when you look at what the government does, the actual budget that's implemented can be quite significantly different from the budget that is presented and approved in Parliament, and that is the story I think. That
I noticed that in the Verite Research Insights that were published in the papers, there was talk of analysis between 2010 and 2014.
That's right. Yeah.
Has that trend continued under the present government as well?
So we've looked at different sectors. For instance, between 2010 and 2014, one of the sectors we looked at was agriculture spending, because there was in that during that period a strong emphasis on improving the rural economy. But what we noticed that every year between 2010 and 2014, the agriculture budget was cut more and more. By cut, I mean the promises were great on the budget, but was actually implemented was less and less in relation to what was promised in the budget. But defense spending was actually not cut that way. Sometimes it was actually increased, even though it was a large amount of money. So really, actions, I think, speak louder than words. And what we were trying to trace is what are the real priorities of the government. Government might tell you that agriculture is its priority, but its real priority may be spending on some other sector.
So did you identify what the real priorities are? I think that's a question that the public has.
Yeah, so I think,
what are the priorities and what's the plan?
I think in the previous round, we noticed that the real priorities hovered around defense and infrastructure expenditure, while the social sector was regularly under-delivered. Now this time we focused on the social sector, and there are 3 findings that come out. I don't know whether you have time to hear them all. The first is that government tends to keep their promises in an election year. Of course. So it is the reality is that the social sector promises, and by that I mean health, education, housing, welfare, community services, agriculture and irrigation also becomes the social sector, because almost 28% of the labor force is in agriculture. The promises get kept in an election year, but between elections the promises are still made, and made even in grander terms, but then they are not kept in the way that they are made. And in fact, the second finding is that the promises in these areas can become grander and grander with time. So really there is a sense of buying or purchasing acceptance or popularity based on the promises that are being made. And I think the media may also have some responsibility here. People never realize that the promises aren't kept, because nobody reports on what was actually done versus what was proposed and passed in the budget. Because by the time the next budget comes out, that's when we know the numbers for the previous budget often. And nobody worries to analyze what has happened. They look to the future and analyze the promise again. But this allows, in a sense, the government to keep not delivering on promises, and I mean successive governments.
But this is a serious issue, isn't it, when you consider it's deception?
We call it deception because you could have 2 explanations. One is deception. One is that even though the government seriously wants to do it, there is a problem in implementation. But if that second explanation held, you wouldn't find that you're able to do it in election year. The fact that they succeed in election years tells you that there is the possibility of implementing, but the will is lacking when elections are not imminent. So I think your use of the word deception therefore becomes more substantive in that regard.
Yeah. Nishan, from 2018 and beyond, what should the government really be looking at in budgeting?
So I think when you come to budgeting for Sri Lanka at the moment, there are significant challenges. One is that government revenue has been coming down over time, and fixed commitments like debt service payments or interest on debt are quite high. The current bill in Parliament is looking to fix some of the problems of reduced government revenue, because if you don't have the revenue, then it is very difficult to expand expenditure. But I think your question also gets at the point of what is the priorities that the government must have. I think the priorities of government is to invest in both the social or human and physical resources of the country, which means that it has to invest in healthcare, it has to invest in education, it has to invest in housing, it has to invest in agriculture. In Sri Lanka, if you have 28% of the labor force in agriculture, you really have to transform the productivity of that sector if you're going to make the country grow and develop. But it must also invest in the public sector and the public services, because if you have a public service that costs you a large amount of money, and investment isn't just money, and isn't delivering or implementing adequately, then you're going to find that the country is hobbled. So I think the performance driven criteria that the current finance ministers have suggested is quite important. And the government must understand that its job is really to make the undergirding infrastructure that enables economic success to work.
Another important factor when the budget is announced is from the citizens' point of view, is they're concerned about taxation. What's going to happen with taxes? What are the changes going to be? Is this healthy for a taxation policy to be changed constantly during budgets?
Taxation policy should certainly not be changed constantly. I think that is a real issue, and we've seen all different manners of ad hoc interventions in taxes and incentives done in budgets. I think what's perhaps positive about the new Inland Revenue Bill is that it looks to fix the taxation regime by law and rescue it from that kind of ad hoc measure. So there'll be a legislation passed and things are fixed by law and can't be changed arbitrarily and regularly. Of course, it is increasing the amount of taxation from what it is in several areas with income tax, corporate tax, etc. There, I think, there is going to be a sense of resistance. Nobody likes to pay taxes. That's natural. But I think it depends on what the government invests that taxes on that ultimately makes us agree or disagree about paying taxes. There are countries in which people pay much higher taxes, 45%, 50%. But the public services are so good, the healthcare is so good, the education is so good, that ultimately you don't grudge your taxes so much. The problem in Sri Lanka is that you cannot increase taxes without increasing the commitment of public services that actually matter to people. So this is why I think the focus on have you kept your promises in education, in healthcare, in housing, in agriculture is now more critical as you increase your taxes.
One more thing before I let you go. There was a lot of talk in the past about capital gains taxes, carbon tax.
That's right.
Do you see these becoming reality in the 2018 budget?
I think the capital gains tax is there.
Yeah.
And it has to be, there are lots of tweaks going on. But what it basically says, I think, outside of inherited property or the main...
Do you think it should be extended to, for example, shares in the stock market?
Well, let's look at it this way. The whole thing about capital gains is that if you make a profit, you pay something. So in the share market, if you lose money, you don't pay taxes, and it's on net gains. So just because if you make some money and you lose some money, then it is ultimately your net profits that are taxed. So as long as it's administered in a way that is net profits, I don't see why a corporate that's working very hard to employ people, make investments and take risks, if it pays 28% tax, then why shouldn't someone who's not working so hard but speculating rather a lot and not pay tax only on their gains? So I think there is a case to say that if you win and if you succeed and you make money,
do you think
then it's okay to share a little
don't you
bit,
think it's also a positive move in that it will temper speculation in the stock exchange?
Well, I don't, not really, in the sense that, ultimately speculation is what enables you to make money, but it won't seem as lucrative. And what it could do is divert money out of speculative activity to more investment related activity. It at least takes away what I would say the lack of a level playing field when you're deciding to invest. So if you can invest in the stock market and not have to pay taxes at the same level of investing in a corporation, then that creates an incentive to move your money out of that kind of productive employment related investment to speculative investment. So I think a level playing field in taxes is quite important.
Dr. Nishan, one more question before I let you go on carbon taxes.
Okay.
We've heard a lot of talk about carbon taxes in the current climate with global sort of perspective shifting towards sustainability, staving off climate change for as long as possible. Does Sri Lanka need a carbon tax?
I feel not very competent to answer that question completely. I think that we need a method to encourage and incentivize people to produce in ways that pollute less. Carbon taxes is one such method. We can certainly do other things. We can incentivize certain types of cleaner technology. We can have government support for building your carbon, sort of the lack of carbon, or building forests and having carbon sinks, for instance. So I think carbon taxes are not the only method that you can use, and carbon credits already benefit Sri Lanka. So in a sense, the fact that you can pay people, you can give people carbon credits rather than charge them carbon taxes, still acts as an incentive. It's a reverse or an inverse tax, if you like. So I'm not going to take a position and say we need carbon taxes, but I'm going to take a position and say we do need to look at all the options we have in incentivizing people to move to better and less polluting forms of production.
Dr. Nishan Dimel, thank you very much for speaking to BizFirst Review 360. It's been a pleasure having you on board.
Yeah, thank you.
Stay tuned, we'll be back with other stories that made headlines this week. Welcome back to the program. As trade is set to increase across the Indian Ocean in the coming years, Sri Lanka is gearing up to carve up its slice of the maritime security pie.
I intend to gear the Navy thoroughly to enable it to contribute to the country's development and its economic prosperity through utilizing our oceanic resources. I also pledge to make the Navy fully capable of protecting the country's maritime interests. I intend to steer the Navy in the development of concepts, forces, weapons and doctrine to enhance expertise and move towards a blue water Navy that will forge partnerships and join the global force in the protection of the global commons in our part of the world. My sole intention is to make the Navy even more professional and competent than it is presently. A Navy that is fully committed to preserving the territorial integrity, sovereignty of our motherland, and to assist with our nation's development in keeping with the national defense policy, as well as the policies of the Navy and the government. Well, the challenges that we see for the Navy coming out of a war is the new mission and a new role. What role do we play now since we have completed a conflict, since the conflict is over? So we are defining this new role that we will play. How we see it is that we are the most stable nation in the region right now, close to us. Looking at the conflicts we see north of us and looking at the countries involved, our neutrality as Sri Lanka, where we don't have a threat, gives our Navy an advantage of actually protecting all commercial traffic that plies between East and West. We will be the only country capable of doing this because we don't have a threat and we are neutral and friends to all in this area. That is our future. That is what our future role is going to be, to protect commercial trade between the Gulf of Aden to the Straits of Malacca. Well, we have progressed quite a bit because you see we have gone over the years, we've started, our military training has increased tenfold. We have our acquisitions of capital ships have increased. We have changed from being a brown water navy as far as training goes, and we are actually downsizing our fast attack craft fleet. We have introduced the Marines and have taken over tasks that are like HADR, human assistance and disaster relief, which we were not capable of doing during the time of the war because we were engaged with another combatant force or the LTT at that time. Yes, so we have changed. We have become fitter, we have become keener, and we have become better. Integral air for the Navy has always been on the cards. It's something that we intended to do in the year 2000. However, due to certain reasons and the budget we had at that time, we were unable to make it work because there was some sort of duplicity with the Air Force. However, having an integral air out in the oceans for the Sri Lanka Navy is a huge advantage as far as surveillance goes. So yes, it is on the cards and let's hope it happens.
How are you going to balance the Air Force?
Well, we don't have to balance the Air Force. We'll get the Air Force pilots to fly for us and the Sri Lanka Navy will be its observers. Submarines in our waters is a possibility. We have certain systems that are capable of detecting submarines. We don't have any threat from any neighboring states right now. So submarines usually outside our territorial waters is not a threat. However, we would like to enhance our capabilities to be able to detect and deter submarines from coming into our EEZ. That is something that we would like to do. So use of anti-submarine vessels or vessels that are mission capable for ASW, anti-submarine warfare, is something that we will also have on our cards.
And that's a wrap of our program for this week. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook. You'll find us at BizFirst Review 360. I'm Nadim Majid. I'll see you again same time, same place next week. Until then, good night and good luck.